Week 9 of the fantasy football season. His running back sits every matchup. First matchup, Houston Texans at the New York Jets. Joe Mixon to start in this one. Joe Mixon, he's been great since he returned from injury. And one of the better running backs in all of fantasy football this season is Joe Mixon. I know on paper it's a tough matchup at the New York Jets, but their run defense hasn't been all that great this season. We saw Ramondre Stevenson last week go for 23 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And Thursday Night Football, usually a shootout, sees a start. Breece Hall a start as well. I know last week was a down week for Hall, but the last 2 out of 3 weeks he's putting up numbers, and the offense has definitely opened up a little with Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson as the 2 wide receivers for the New York Jets, even though they're struggling and still not winning ball games. But for the most part, Breece Hall, he's been a solid running back in terms of points per game for fantasy owners. Dallas Cowboys at the Atlanta Falcons. Rico Dotto most likely should be back from illness after he missed last week's game at the San Francisco 49ers, but he's a sit. Same thing with Ezekiel Elliott. This Cowboy run game just hasn't done much all season long, and that's got a lot to do with trailing early and often in these ball games for the Dallas Cowboys. I know the Falcons' run defense isn't all that great, but it's tough to trust Cowboys' backfield right now, especially with 15 games this week by Bijan Robinson to start. Last 3 weeks, he's definitely kicked it into gear and taking the next step in his development is Bijan Robinson. So physical back in between the tackles, a good yard after catch and receiving back out of the backfield. And Kirk Cousins and him are building rapport, and he's picking up the new system. Even though I know we're already 2 months into the season, take some time. And Bijan, the last 3 weeks, he's been a top 5, top 8 back. Denver Broncos at the Baltimore Ravens. Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin sits. Javonte Williams last week in a plus matchup. He was supposed to go out there and have a monster game versus the Panthers, but obviously that didn't happen, even though Bo Nix had a big ball game versus the Carolina Panthers. So this week in a matchup where they're most likely going to be trailing in this one and have to abandon the run early and often is Denver. I believe Javonte Williams, we're not going to see much out of him, and his ceiling's been low all season long besides that one pop game he had at the New Orleans Saints going back to Week 7, and Jaleel McLaughlin, if he's not scoring a touchdown, he's pretty much not doing much either for fantasy owners. So he's a sit. Derrick Henry, best running back in fantasy football this season. I know last week numbers were just a bit down because it was a back-and-forth game, and he don't play on third downs and passing downs for the most part is Henry. But like I said, he's a big-time running back. He's putting up a lot of points, and he's a must-start. Vegas Raiders at the Cincinnati Bengals. Alexander Mattison, Zamir White, both sits for me. This backfield just isn't consistent enough, and with Gardner Minshew in their quarterback, teams are forcing Minshew to try to beat him, attacking the box and stopping the run. And with this Raider team, they go down early and often. They're going to have no choice but to throw the football like they've done in previous weeks. So they're both sits. Chase Brown a start. Last week he found the end zone, but the last couple weeks his points per game have gone down a decent amount as Chase Brown, even though I think he's the back you want over here for the Cincinnati Bengals this season. So Brown, a good receiver out of the backfield. In between the tackles, he's improving a little bit as the year goes on. And this week in a great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, where their defense can't stop anyone. He's a start. Zach Moss a flex option. He's taken a back seat over the last couple weeks to Chase Brown with the fumble issue going back a few weeks ago at the New York Giants. And that's what's done Zach Moss in, I believe, because Chase Brown's taken over the last couple weeks, getting more touches. And he's also a better receiver out of the backfield. So he's a flex option at best. He's Morse, New England Patriots at the Titans. I know this Titans defense has been torched over the last couple weeks. And I know Ramondre Stevenson last week had a nice ball game versus New York Jets. But this week he's a flex option to me. This Tennessee run defense for the most part has been solid all season long. But they just ran into 2 good opponents versus the Bills in Week 7 in Buffalo. And then last week at Detroit, even though James Cook didn't do much versus this Tennessee defense. So Stevenson, especially if Jacoby Brissett's in there at quarterback with Drake May in concussion protocol, I think the numbers go down this week. Tony Pollard, he's a start. He's been a solid running back all season long for this Tennessee Titan team. Nice number 2 running back for fantasy owners in a matchup where both offenses obviously aren't that good and these defenses are middle of the pack to poor. I think Tony Pollard comes out with a good ball game. New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers. Alvin Kamara is start, one of the best running backs in all pro football this season in fantasy football, catching the football out of the backfield. In between the tackles, there's no threat. and Keandre Miller banged up as well now, leaving last week's ball game at the Los Angeles Chargers. So Kamara locked in as a top 10 option. Once again, Chuba Hubbard to start. The last 3 weeks, his numbers have dropped down drastically. And teams now, they know Chuba Hubbard can't sneak up on them, where they're going to have to pay a lot of attention and load the box, especially with Bryce Young back in there at quarterback, if he's going to start once again this week. So a tougher matchup versus Saints. But Chuba Hubbard, he's still putting up good numbers, like I said, even though they've dropped off the last couple weeks. And the looming return of Jonathan Brooks as well, who's beginning to practice. So Brooks possibly could return in this game, but we don't know what his workload's going to be. We know Chuba Hubbard's been solid back all season long, like I said, and Jonathan Brooks definitely should be rostered in all 10-team leagues or deeper. But right now, I would take a wait-and-see approach. This weekend, not a great matchup versus the Saints. He's a sit. Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. Devon Achane, who looked back last week. Big ball game for Achane. Out of the backfield, catching the football on a screen touchdown. In between the tackles, yards per carry, it was great for him as well. And Achane, we saw the elite season last year in his rookie year. And now with Tua back in the lineup, I think the numbers are going to be good once again, even though it is a tougher matchup at the Buffalo Bills. But Achane, he's a start each and every week. Raheem Mostert found the end zone twice, vulturing Devon Achane last week. But Raheem Mostert, if he didn't get those 2 touchdowns, it was a ball game not to remember for him and for fantasy owners. So Raheem Mostert, after that one big game, after all season-long injuries and not producing, have done him in. He's not a running back I could trust. He's a sit. James Cook, he's a start each and every week. I know a couple weeks ago it was a down game versus Tennessee, and then last week he exploded at the Seattle Seahawks with over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So he's a must-start in a good matchup. Los Angeles Chargers at the Cleveland Browns, J.K. Dobbins to start. He's easily the number 1 back over there. Amini Vidal will get more touches in this offense for this Los Angeles Charger team, but obviously that hasn't come to fruition. So Dobbins, he's getting those 20, 25 touches per week. This Cleveland Brown defense obviously not as good as they were last season, and running backs for the most part have had good success, and we know Dobbins a decent receiver out of the backfield. So with no real threat right now in the backfield for Dobbins, he's definitely a start. Nick Chubb a start. I know the first 2 games back off the knee injury for Nick Chubb, the numbers haven't been all that great, but Nick Chubb, it just takes a couple games to get off that knee injury and get stronger as the year goes on. So we saw last season with Breece Hall, he came off the ACL. Took him a few games to get his legs under him, and I think Nick Chubb could go out there and have a decent game. I know Deonta Foreman, Pierre Strong were mixed in a little bit, but Nick Chubb, he's the starting running back. Jerome Ford still banged up. We don't know if he's going to come back, and Nick Chubb is a back-end 2 running back. I think it's a decent start. This Commanders at the New York Giants, Brian Robinson, he's a start each and every week. One of the best running backs in fantasy football this season. Big physical back in between the tackles, can catch the football out of the backfield at times. And once he's within the 5-yard line, he's muscling into the end zone. So this week with a great matchup for the New York Giants, where their run defense has been bad all season. We saw Najee Harris have a good game versus Giants last week. I think he goes out there, has a good performance. This week is Brian Robinson. He's a start. Austin Eckler, a sit for me this week. Eckler, the first 4 weeks of the season, double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. But now Austin Eckler, the last couple of weeks, the numbers have gone down, and Brian Robinson's getting even more of a workload. And obviously Jaden Daniels, a running quarterback as well. So with all those factors, you just can't trust Austin Eckler. And also with 15 games on the slate this week now to the New York Giants, Tyrone Tracy, it looked like he was going to be the man in the backfield after a monster performance at a great Steelers defense. 20 carries, 145 yards, and found the end zone. But late in the fourth quarter, he hit his head on the turf, and he was dazed and out of it. It looked like it was Tracy, and taken back to the locker room pretty quickly. So most likely a concussion it is for Tyrone Tracy. I don't believe he's going to play in this game on the short week. And now Devin Singletary is going to step back into the starting lineup. And this week, he's a sit for me, is Devin Singletary. I know he's a capable back. I know we've seen some decent things out of him last year and a little bit this season with the New York Giants. But his ceiling isn't as high as a Tyrone Tracy, and he's not much of a receiver out of the backfield as well, Devin Singletary. And this could be a ball game where the Giants are trailing early and often and have to throw a whole lot. So with Tyrone Tracy most likely out, Singletary, the only running back that's going to be an option this week for the Giants, but he's a sit for me in this one. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll see if Travis Etienne returns to the lineup this week. And Etienne, we know, is a good receiving back out of the backfield, but I've said this all season long. Tank Bigsby the more physical and better back, in my opinion, in between the tackles. So this week at the Philadelphia Eagles, their run defense is middle of the pack. Both these running backs are best flex options. Saquon Barkley, top 5 back all season long. Explosive, fits this offense like a glove. I know goal line touches are going to be taken away from Barkley, and we've seen it this season with the tush push and QB sneaks by Jalen Hurts this season. But Saquon Barkley still putting up big production, and he's a start each and every week in a good matchup. Chicago Bears at the Cardinals. DeAndre Swift, first 3 weeks of the season, he couldn't get anything going, but the last 4 games he's gone out there and he's putting up elite numbers at the running back position. Is DeAndre Swift. So last season had a 1,000-yard year with the Philadelphia Eagles. This season he's fitting in now over the last month of the season with the Chicago Bears. And this week a great matchup at the Arizona Cardinals, where their defense, they give up a lot of points to running backs. He's a start. James Conner start as well. He's the workhorse. Trey Benson, DeMarcado, they haven't been running backs that are eating into the workload. And in between the tackles, he's a good back and catching the football out of the backfield. So this Arizona offense, I actually like it a lot. Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride, James Conner, good complement of weapons. And all these guys, for the most part, go out there and have production. So I think Conner, even in a tougher matchup versus the Bears this week, is a start. Kyren Williams, top 5, top 8 back weekly is Kyren Williams. Last week, another big game. And this week, a great matchup at the Seahawks, where they just gave up over 100 yards on the ground to James Cook and finding the end zone twice. So Kyren Williams, he's locked in weekly as a start. Kenneth Walker, pretty much he's a safe bet to be a start week in and week out, is Kenneth Walker. I know last week was a down game, but it was a tough matchup versus the Bills, and they got behind quickly on the scoreboard from 2 to 3 touchdowns the whole game. So Kenneth Walker, I think, bounces back and has a good game in a division matchup. Detroit Lions at the Packers. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, the best 1-2 combo backfield in all pro football, in my opinion. This week, I know it's a tougher matchup at the Green Bay Packers, but last week we saw Jacksonville have success moving the football on this defense. I think Montgomery and Gibbs, once again, you both put them in the starting lineup and expect a pretty good game out of both these running backs. Their starts. Josh Jacobs, he's been a workhorse all season long. We'll see if Jordan Love plays in this ball game for this Green Bay Packer team. And Josh Jacobs, he's a big physical back. He's getting all the touches, like I said. Emmanuel Wilson, minimum touches he's getting for this Green Bay Packer team. So this week in a matchup and a potential shootout in the NFC North, he's a start. Sunday night, Indianapolis Colts at the Minnesota Vikings. Jonathan Taylor's back, and he looked good last week, 100 yards, fun in the end zone for this Indianapolis Colts team. I know this week it's a tougher matchup at the Minnesota Vikings, but we saw Kyren Williams go out there and have 23 fantasy points in PPR leagues last week. So this week, Jonathan Taylor, he was a top 10, top 12 pick overall. And if he's healthy, he's a very good back, no doubt about it, this start. Aaron Jones, a start for me as well in this ball game. Aaron Jones, one of the better running backs, believe it or not, all season long in fantasy football. We know the one thing with Jones, injuries have been a concern throughout his NFL career, but when he's healthy, he's a top 15 back. Worst case, this week in a good matchup versus Indianapolis, where their defense has had trouble stopping opposing teams all season long. I like Aaron Jones as a start in the final game of the week, Monday night. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Kansas City Chiefs. Rashad White, Bucky Irvin. It's been a nice 1-2 combo over the last few weeks here. And these guys obviously have to step up even more with the injuries to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So last week, both backs went out there, over 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues for both backs. But this week, a very tough matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs, where they're one of the best defenses, in my opinion, in all pro football is Kansas City. So right now, with these two running backs, they're flex options with the tough matchup. And I think Kansas City trying to zero in on these players this week. And Kareem Hunt's a start. Ever since he got signed, is Kareem Hunt and got an opportunity. Once Carson Steele had these fumble issues, he's taken this backfield by storm, and he's never looked back as Kareem Hunt. He's been a workhorse for this Kansas City Chief team. Patrick Mahomes trusts him a lot. Andy Reid trusts him a lot, where he was there many seasons ago and had a great year. And this week, in a good matchup versus a Tampa Bay defense that can't stop anyone, we saw Bijan go off for a nice game versus them last week. Kareem Hunt is a start, so that's running back start sits every matchup. Week 9 of the fantasy football season.